In today's episode of The Conscious Entrepreneur, I sit down with Andy Johns, a Silicon Valley tech veteran who's been through the intense pressures of startup life and emerged with profound insights into managing stress and preventing burnout. Andy's journey is one that many entrepreneurs can relate to: outward success paired with inner turmoil. After years of pushing himself to the limit, he experienced severe burnout that led to a deep reevaluation of his life and priorities. Here's what we discuss in today's episode: the critical role of the nervous system in stress management, practical techniques for preventing burnout, the importance of integrating body-based practices like breathwork and thermogenesis, how to create daily routines that support resilience, and understanding and addressing subconscious patterns that contribute to burnout. I think this is a really great episode. Let's dive in. Andy, thanks so much for joining us. Great to see you here today.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here.
I came across your work as someone who has been through your own personal journey around dealing with the effects of life at tech companies. I'll put it that way. And specifically, you've done a lot of writing on nervous system mastery. So getting to know and understand what's going on the inside. You've also done a lot of work on topics like burnout and how to prevent it and how to overcome it. You've done work on uncovering subconscious patterns and things that are happening inside of us as humans, and how those patterns and beliefs then manifest in the outside world. So I've been aware of your work for a while. You write a great newsletter at clues.life, which is super cool, a really valuable resource for folks. So I'm excited to be here and chat with you. And I guess I'd really like to start by talking about the importance of the nervous system. So, as entrepreneurs, we're given all these tools and resources on how to build our companies and hire people and, do all this stuff, but we're not often trained to take care of our physical selves during the process. And, I'd love if you could just share how this became such an important part of your life and your work. And then we'll get into, how should we be thinking about the nervous system, and how do we make sure that we are fully optimized as we're going through our life and our careers. But let's just start with, like, why does this matter to you? How did you decide that this was going to be your thing?
Yeah, it matters to me because I was the one who burned out. And towards the end of my career, which I worked in startups for 16, 17 years. And then through my startup journey, I was seeing a therapist and trying to work on anxiety and depression issues I was having on and off, as well as panic attacks that I was having. And so mental health was something that was kind of in the background while I was building my career. And so a classic scenario of everything looks great on paper. Like, here's this guy, he's attached to all these successful startups and yay. But on the inside, truthfully, I was just a bunch of Band-Aids, just barely holding it together. And as my career accelerated and I took on more responsibilities and more stress, and my work-life balance became less balanced, I eventually hit the point of a complete burnout. And it was coupled, it sort of went hand in hand with what some people would describe as a spiritual awakening, which, just to sort of ground it in relatable terms, it was an emotional burnout from the cumulative stress of all of my life experiences that I was just holding on to. And not only did I reach that point and realize that I needed to step away from my career to take care of my health, but when I did, that sort of precipitated this sudden and spontaneous collapse of my sense of self, my identity as it related to my work, and how my work and the achievement that came from it was really the thing underpinning my identity as a whole. So to put it shortly, it's like my self-worth was entirely attached to whether or not I was achieving in a material and esteemable sense. And so both of those things happened at the same time. It was one of, if not the hardest thing I've ever had to go through. It's been a solid 4-year process that I'm still sort of navigating through. But that's really what brought me from Andy, the fancy startup guy who's having all these paper successes to somebody who was just broken emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually, and had to answer this call to figure out like, what is going on with me? What is this catastrophic collapse that I'm experiencing? How do I get through this? Because this is awful. And the end result of that has been that, it's, to draw an analogy, it's like if you're a mountain guide, you can only guide somebody as far as you've taken yourself. And as I guided myself, along with the assistance of others, through this process of rebuilding myself after burnout and coming to better understand myself after this sort of collapse of my identity, has been this interest and this passion and this gift for being able to guide others through it. So, that's what brought me to it. And to like the specific application of it to the tech world, of which I was a part of for a long time, is basically burnout prevention. What does it mean? And what did I learn from my own experience, and what can I do to share that message?
Well, I'm sure your experience and observations will mirror mine, insofar as I would say there's way more burnout happening out there than most people are aware of.
Yes.
And so, so many people are operating, by the way, myself included. I mean, for a long time, I've been operating at the edge of burnout. And that's why I've had folks on this podcast like Jim Young or Nea Sangwan, like we're talking about it to really understand, like, what does burnout mean? How does it feel? How can we prevent it? Or if we're starting to get there, how can we, get ourselves back from the line? How can we make sure that we don't go over the line there? And, my other observation on this is we just don't have a good vocabulary. We don't have a good way of talking about burnout. And it's one of these things where it almost feels like if you burn out, you're failing at something. And I think what you're showing us is, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this, what I think you're showing us is, we can learn to work with our internal systems, be they physical, mental, spiritual, and use all that stuff to our benefit. But how do you think about changing the conversation around burnout and pointing people to things that will actually be solutions or helpful to them along the way?
Yeah, and to your first point, the issue of burnout is far more pervasive than folks realize, and it's, in my opinion, truly reaching a sort of global scale problem. And the source of it is not apparent either. So just to broaden the picture a little bit, and to give credit to Robert Sapolsky, a biologist out of Stanford, a neuroscientist, and somebody who's actually studied primates for a couple decades at this point. He's truly an expert on an understanding of the human mind, including the nervous system. And in his book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, great book name.
Great book name. It's funny. I picked it up after I saw you posting about it on LinkedIn.
It's he provides an incredibly clear explanation regarding what's actually going on, and this is my interpretation of it, which is, the human nervous system was evolved for short-term activation associated with physical threat, right? So I'm a zebra, a lion comes after me, the sympathetic nervous system kicks on, it gives my body a temporary boost of superpowers so that I can fight or flight, right? I can run for my life or fight for my life. And then, assuming that this physical threat comes to an end after a couple of minutes or half an hour, then the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, which is the rest and digest side, that then brings the body back down to homeostasis. And those sorts of life-threatening physical threats aren't common. And so they don't happen a lot. And like I said, it was meant to be temporary, because turning on the body's superpowers comes at a cost. It's incredibly expensive for the organism. Certain processes, for example, reproductive processes, shut down during that fight or flight stage. Digestion will shut down. Basically, the body's saying like, hey, all these other things that aren't necessary for survival right now,
I've got more important things to do right now.
Exactly. Like, I got to fight off this lion. Who cares about making babies right now? Right. And so that's the context. Now, fast forward to today, to the modern environment, and thinking about this as a techie, because you're in the thick of it, is we are not surrounded by episodic physical threats to our life in the same way that we used to be as, a wild mammal. Instead, we're exposed to a constant, steady stream of at least low to moderate level psychological stressors. Right. So that can be anything from all the doom and gloom that you see on the news all the time. It can be the subtleties that your body is picking up of the environment around you, of like the traffic noises and the honking and this crazy guy on the street screaming. And it's the constant stream of emails and notifications you're getting on Slack. It's the existential uncertainty of operating in startup land and not knowing if our company is going to succeed or not, and going through that whiplash all the time. And then you do that in addition to the psychological stressors that just come from needing to pay bills and keep a roof over your head. And maybe there's family drama and this and that and the other. And this happened very, very quickly. Certainly in the course of 100 years, most of this transition happening in the course of the last 30. And
so you're talking about the biological adaptation for us as humans. Like, all these constant stressors are new, and we have no idea how to adapt to them, and we are perceiving all this stuff as like low level threats.
Exactly. And so this nervous system, which was designed for short-term activation, is now constantly activated due to psychological stressors, because the psychological stressors initiate the nervous system in the same way that a physical stressor will. And so that's why I say people in tech are like smack dab in the middle of this, because our job is flush with psychological stressors, right? In addition to the psychological stressors that are more and more common within modern society.
It's always go, go, go. We got to get the growth. We got to ship faster. We got to do more. We got to conquer the world. And the pressure, whatever we're feeling at the top, then gets cascaded down to everyone inside the company. So it becomes just part of the culture.
And here's the important thing is, like, what's happening then is, like, so when the body turns on those superpowers, because a part of the nervous system thinks it's under threat, it's flooding the body with, for example, stress hormones or adrenaline. And if it continues to flood the body with these things that were only meant to exist in the body for a short period of time until it was cleared out, and then you come back to rest and digest mode, the body also wasn't evolved to sustain that heightened level of activation. And so more and more research is making this very clear, that there is a direct relationship between psychological stress, specifically sustained psychological stress, and chronic illness, both psychologically and physically. So, sure. For example, there's a direct relationship between stress hormones that interact with the part of the gut biome that is responsible for generating your immune response. And so you can have a direct immune suppression or a weakening of the innate vitality of your immune response because of the constant stream of psychological stressors and how that's cascading through your body. And we're finding more and more relationships between that and all sorts of chronic illness, from cancers to chronic digestive issues, like irritable bowel syndrome, to multiple sclerosis,
right?
You name it. So it's not just that maybe we're eating crap food, we are. And it's not just, we're not as active physically as we used to be, we're not. It's also that we're under constant psychological stress.
Yeah. Well, what you're saying is reminding me of, so not only the Robert Sapolsky book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, but also, for example, The Body Keeps the Score. So the MS thing comes up in there. And also in the work of Gabor Mate, like, we have a lot of understanding now of how this stuff is piling onto us and creating stress. And one of the things that, I think is really great for anyone listening, like, if you want a visual idea of how this should get resolved in the wild, anyone who has a dog has seen their dog de-stress all the time when the dog does that shake, right? Like, my dog does it 20 times a day, 50 times a day, whatever. my little miniature schnauzer Dash. And I can tell she's doing that when she needs to release stress. And we as humans don't do that. And so instead it just comes in and we pile it on. And maybe, the typical symptoms would be our shoulders hunch over, we get more compact, our breathing gets shallower. I know all sorts of other physical things are happening to us, but we then don't literally just like get up and shake it all off and then proceed on with our day. Probably just because of the volume of shit that's out there.
Yeah. It's omnipresent. And for today's kids, you're born into it. So as far as you know, this is what normal is. And it's not. At least from an evolutionary standpoint, this is not normal. And our body and our mind is doing its best to cope with an environment that is very, very different than what it evolved for. And which kind of leads into then it's the question of like, okay, so if that is the norm, what do we do about that? Is it a nihilistic response of like, well, shit, we got to burn all this down then? The modern world is toxic. It's like, whoa, hold on a second. Like, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to be wise with respect to understanding the very complicated and nuanced nature of the pros and cons of this environment we've crafted for ourselves. But specifically to entrepreneurs and techies in general is, okay, your career is in tech. You may be asking yourself, well, is this good for me in the long run? Maybe, maybe not. Everyone's different. Certain people have different resilience characteristics. I know some folks, where myself included, is very, very sensitive to the environment around me. And so I would absorb all of these psychological stressors and the moods of my employees around me. Other people I know, they're not like this. But to the question of like, what do we do about it? Short of saying, let's burn this all down because it's only bad, which it isn't, is to basically then say, okay, if the environment I'm in is an environment that is partially necessary because this is where I live and work and where my family is, and I have some connection or obligation to this work and this lifestyle and what I'm doing, or I enjoy it and I just want to like be able to survive it in a way where this cascade of psychological stressors doesn't overwhelm me, what do I do? And the answer is like, well, you effectively need to arm yourself every day against that environment, to insulate yourself against it, if your choice isn't to just sort of separate yourself from it. Like that's what eventually I did, because I hit full burnout. And the only thing I could do was say, I'm out.
I got to go. But not everybody has the luxury to do that. Not everyone wants to do that. So there's got to be different paths. And you're talking about creating some kind of daily routine or weekly routines around us to be aware of what's happening and then still give us resilience.
Correct. And so this has been an area of study for me. I'm actually going to be spending the first half of next year training in specific forms of breath work that are really good for resetting the nervous system and actually purging any of this old stored negative emotional energy that you might be holding. So this is something I've studied a lot. I've learned a lot from folks like Johnny Miller, who comes from the entrepreneurship world and teaches classes on this to entrepreneurs. So this isn't all original Andy, is the point I'm trying to make. But what I've learned is that you have to go into each day with this mindset of, I'm going to do a certain set of things every day. Let's call it my nervous system hygiene, that allows me to do two things. One may be to purge or to shed the day's stress. Like you mentioned about dogs, like it's great to watch them because sometimes you'll see it, they'll just do they sigh. The sigh response is a real thing. That is a direct cue to the parasympathetic nervous system to like deload, bring it down, find equilibrium, right? So I need to find a certain set of things I can do every day that allows me to shed whatever negative nervous system energy I've absorbed from the day. And I also need to do some things that sort of insulate me ahead of time for whatever's about to come my way. And I just refer to this as the bookend method. Just like you have the bookends at the ends of a bookshelf. Yeah. It's like you have a routine in the morning and you have a routine in the evening. The routine in the morning is more about calm alertness. I want to be alert, I want to be aware, but I want to be calm. And then the routine that I have at the end of the day is, okay, whatever shit I just brought on from the meetings and this stupid thing, this thing said, and this one vendor acting up and this API breaking and all these other things, I need to have something that allows me to wipe the slate clean. And then if I do that repeatedly and I dial in that routine and find the specific things that work for me, well, then here I am able to operate in this industry within the psychological stressors of the modern world. And I could do so sustainably. That's really the point.
Right. So I had that in place to help me to regulate my nervous system, to be prepared for whatever is coming up. So what are the things that you're putting onto these bookends? This is, I presume, things like breath work, exercise, sleep, food that you're eating or foods that you're avoiding, social, but like what, help us get a little bit more concrete into what those look like.
Yeah, most of these things fall into the category of like, these are dieting hard, not physics hard. If you've ever heard that saying, like they're not intellectually difficult to wrap your mind around. They're just hard to stick to. Okay. And so it's like, if I can do this 80% of the time, that's winning. I think of them in two categories: top-down methods, meaning methods that utilize the mind to sort of try and regulate the mind and the nervous system, and then bottoms-up methods, which are use your body to treat the mind. When I first started this journey myself, my understanding of mental health, like I think most folks, especially in the West, is that most forms of mental health treatment have to do with the head. You sit down, you talk to a therapist, you do cognitive behavioral therapy or other forms of therapy, and you use the mind to treat the mind effectively.
Yeah.
And I have found benefit in that. But I've over time come to believe that the body-based, the bottoms-up methods are far more important than the top-down head-based methods. I think that the top-down head-based methods are good for creating a map, allegorically, meaning, okay, maybe I'm in a state of heightened stress or panic and I'm overwhelmed. I can't get my mind right. Like, I'm just trying to figure out what the hell is going on and why do I feel the way I feel right now. That's where talk therapy with the guidance of a professional psychoanalyst is quite helpful, is saying, okay, let me just understand in the way that a map would, where am I at right now, right? But eventually, and where I've found the limitations of top-down methods is that eventually you just got to like put the map down and put your feet on the trail and walk that trail. And you're going to much more deeply understand that terrain through your feet on the train than by looking at the map. Mm-hmm. And that's what the body-based methods are all about. And a lot of those body-based methods work quite quickly, whereas with cognitive behavioral therapy, as what scientists and therapists referred to as the dose response rate, is basically like, how many times do I have to do this over what period of time before I experience a benefit?
And I mean, people in therapy for years.
Yes. And they might have been in 20, 30, 40 sessions being like, why do I kind of feel the same way? And it's like, well, maybe it's because you actually need to get out of your head and get into your body. And that by treating your body well, it's going to naturally downregulate the chaos that's in your mind. And so for me, there are a handful of things that are really, really effective at bottoms up body-based stuff. The first is breath work. I've heard it referred to, actually Johnny Miller talks about this as, your breath is the remote control to your nervous system. And there are various forms of patterns of breathing that you can practice and use every single day that give a signal to the rest of your body, including your nervous system, about the state that you are in or want to be in. So a very simple classic example is box breathing, right? You breathe in for 5 seconds, you hold it for 5 seconds, you exhale for 5 seconds, you hold it for 5 seconds. And if you repeat that, you do that for 15, 20 minutes in the morning, I think you'll find that your resting heart rate is quite low. you have this generally sort of like benign, calm sense about you. And that simply by regulating the in and out of your lungs, all of a sudden the rest of your body and then your mind decides, I'm in a nice, calm state.
Mm-hmm.
I won't go into too many different methods because there are a whole bunch of methods. I think it's worth people doing the research themselves. But there are many, many methods that not only have a basis in certain cultures that are thousands of years old, but they're also being proven through modern neuroscience and medical research. And so you have overwhelming ancient wisdom, the evidence of ancient wisdom combined with the evidence of modern neuroscience that suggests that the breath is where it's at. The second is thermogenesis, which is exposing the body to hot and cold.
Okay.
For me, a hot sauna or hot yoga, if I can do hot yoga in the morning, I mean, that is way more effective than any antidepressant I've ever taken. And I've been on antidepressants through 2 3-year cycles when I was just in a state of crisis and needed something to help. And exposing the body to hot or to cold, in a nutshell, turns on certain superpowers in the body that as the body then attempts to bring itself back into homeostasis, whether it's raising its body temperature back up or bringing the temperature back down, it activates a whole series of events that will produce an immense calming effect. And when I do hot yoga, what I find is that because yoga also incorporates conscious breathing patterns, that the combination of the 50 minutes of heat exposure, the movement of my body, the breath work that I'm doing through that then afterwards, when I step outside and I give my body half an hour to calm and cool down, and then I go and take a cold shower, my nervous system is rosy. I'm good to go.
Sauna is the thing for me too. I probably go to the sauna 5 times a week, usually in the afternoons, evenings after I work out, and I literally have come to think of it as like I'm physically addicted to the sauna, and going to the gym is just my reason to like be able to go to the sauna.
Exactly. Same here. Like the number one reason I have my membership is it's got a sauna there. So part of my morning routine is I get up. Generally, I try and get up around the sun. I go outside. I walk in the sun. I allow the sun to do its magic on me. I'll speak about that in a moment. I walk to the gym, 20 minutes outside. There's a park, there's trees, you name it. I get to the gym. I sit in the sauna for 20 or 30 minutes. It elevates the heart rate. It gets up to around 110 beats a minute, sometimes 120 if it's really hot in there. So it's simulating a low to moderate cardiovascular workout. It's releasing all sorts of heat shock proteins that have all sorts of benefits around soft tissue repair and so on and so forth. It's also producing neurochemical changes. And then afterwards, as I calm down and cool off, I then get my nice little iced coffee, and then I walk home outside in the sun and nature.
Nice.
Thermogenic exposure or thermogenesis is super important. I try and make that a daily thing. What I said about sunshine is really important. This, for me, again, is another body-based method because at the end of the day, it all ties into our circadian rhythms, which I think of it, and maybe this is technically wrong from, the Andrew Hubermans of the world can correct me on it. But basically, we know that plants have a process known as photosynthesis. What they do is they take energy in the form of photons from the sun and carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They bring those in, and then they transmute those two things, carbon dioxide plus photonic energy. They transmute that into the metabolic processes that power the plant, which we call photosynthesis. And humans, mammals, everything that evolved under the sun, going back 65 million years to the TK extinction event, which was the big asteroid that took out the dinosaurs, if you assume there was 10 years of the sky mostly blacked out and then 90% or more of life on Earth disappeared, but for that 10% that remained and that evolved, we had 65 million years of sunshine. And we have our own form of photosynthesis. We similarly take sunlight, photonic energy, we absorb it through our eyes, we absorb it through our skin, we breathe in oxygen, we combine that with other sources of fuel, but we transmute that into the metabolic processes that directly relate to hormone production and performance. Like all the way down to the mitochondria in the cell. Dr. Christopher Palmer out of Harvard Psychiatry talks about this. There are others that talk about this. A really fascinating book that I read. It was written in the 70s by a physician, and I'll give it to you so you can put it in the show notes, where they did tons of research looking at basically the role of energy in the body and the direct interaction between sunlight and how we transmute sunlight into metabolic processes that are essential for powering our health.
Yeah, no, I've certainly heard that. I've heard the benefits of getting up in the mornings, being near, looking at the sun, being outside, not inside your house. It's a way to reset the clock, if you will. So far we've got breath work, light, sauna. What about sleep? What about food? What about exercise? What else is part of this bottoms up routine?
I won't beat to death the whole sleep thing because so many people have covered it at this point, but abso-freaking-lutely. Like, you have to tell yourself, hey, that late night email or whatever that I think is important to respond to, it's not. Let it go. Ignore it. Put on turn off the screens. Get those out of your bedroom. And for the last hour or two of your day, have no interaction with technology.
Mm-hmm.
And then go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time, and do that every day. Like, let your body fall into its rhythm. All of this is interrelated to the natural metabolic processes, including hormone production in the body that is necessary for nervous system regulation. So a consistent sleep schedule is essential. The food thing is hugely underrepresented. It's never been more true that you are what you eat. The team at Metabolic Mind is a team that folks should check out, and their backyard is in Silicon Valley. So David Baszucki and Jan Baszucki. David is the founder and CEO of Roblox. And Jan Baszucki, his wife, they run this nonprofit research organization called Metabolic Mind. They're doing incredible work, along with Dr. Christopher Palmer out of Harvard Psychiatry, and several others who are Georgia Eddy out of Harvard Psychiatry. They're all specializing in what is now being called metabolic psychiatry, which is the interaction between our metabolism and the occurrence of mental health issues that can be directly attached to metabolic dysfunction.
Sure.
And not only is it sun exposure, not only is it exercise, not only is it sleep that factors into our metabolic health, but so is our diet directly. And what they're showing through their research is that with specific dietary interventions, they've been able to reverse or put in remission major psychiatric illness. Dr. Christopher Palmer talks about this, working with patients who have schizoaffective disorder, who have lifelong debilitating bipolar, people who are hearing and seeing auditory and visual hallucinations. These are people who aren't able to maintain jobs or relationships. Major lifestyle disruption that all of a sudden, when they put them on a ketogenic diet and those folks switched into ketosis, within 1, 2, 3 months, many, if not most, of their major symptoms of mental illness just went away, including the son of Jan and David Baszucki, who had lifelong bipolar disorder. And for the last 4 to 5 years at this point, has been able to keep it mostly in remission, primarily through improving his metabolic function through his diet. So, like, the simple thing is, like, I've heard this saying, I can't remember who it came from, but it'll get you 90% of the way there. If you're thinking, okay, what do I eat? It's like, if it's a plant, eat it. If it eats plants, meaning animals, eat it. If it's made in a plant, that is its process, don't eat it.
Right.
And everything else after that, if you want to, through personal philosophy, say, I'm going to be vegan, I'm not going to eat animal products. So whatever, make your own choice, but don't let ideology get in the way of what actually works for you.
Yeah. Well, I just want to come back and like, um, connect the dots here a little bit. So for the entrepreneur who's out there, constantly on, running around, feeling a heightened sense of stress, and then says, "What can I do about this?" To recap parts of this conversation, at least, it's like, yes, there are tools that you may find that you need to use. You may need to go to therapy for something. You may need to do some of this top-down stuff and be aware of what's going on in your mind, and process anything that needs to be processed there. But if you really want to look at this and say, what about from the bottoms up? What can I do for my body right now? You're giving really concrete, specific things that we can do for our bodies. And as our bodies get in a better state, our bodies feel more relaxed, guess what? Our level of stress goes down. We become more effective at our jobs. We're better leaders. We're better at sales. We're better at coding. We're better at all the things that we're meant to be doing. We get better at because our body feels more comfortable. And this is really powerful, even though we're getting into it in kind of a lot of detail. The point still is there are things that you can do today, right? You can say, I'm going to make a commitment to get a certain amount of exercise, to get light in the morning, to do hot exposure or cold exposure, to sleep better, to eat less junk food, eat less processed food. I'm going to do some type of breathwork thing either in the morning to get myself invigorated or in the evening to let myself wind down. Like, these things are really, really valuable because, it doesn't, like, most of them don't cost very much money, right? And it's just stuff that you can go do. You can be out there and you can immediately see a benefit. And I think to people who are out there thinking, oh man, I'm really close to burnout, or I'm not feeling very good right now, these are things you can do today, and tomorrow you will start feeling better.
Yes. Yeah. And for those folks that are close to it, or sort of orbiting right around that burnout point, and you're feeling overwhelmed, what you may find is that the top-down methods just don't work for you during that time, right? It's common, for example, if you go into the therapist and you're in a state of crisis, one of the first things that a therapist may do, is it's in their toolkit, is say, well, consider this antidepressant. Because it may be a short-term intervention that just brings you out of that crisis mode. And then because you're out of the crisis, or you're feeling a bit more steady, everything else you then try thereafter through talk therapy and what have you, you're more receptive, you're more open, and you can actually sort of extract the benefits from it. And these body-based interventions are effectively the same thing. It's like, you can do this now. It can work fairly quickly. It can bring you out of that crisis mode. And then when you're out of crisis, you can then pursue all these other things more effectively. The other thing I'd say along those lines is that, when you're at or near that crisis point and the mind is already a bit of a hornet's nest, like, talking your way through it or thinking your way through it may not work. It's not going to meet you where you're at, but you may also just want to turn to play, to creativity, to art, to music, to love, to connection with others. Like, those are the things that'll meet you where you're at, and they're really, really effective at help bringing you out of crisis. So I think in addition to the body-based things, whether it's music, playing an instrument, listening to music, art, playing with Legos, it doesn't matter what it is. Like, find that thing that when you do it, it sort of brings in almost this instant meditative state. I have one of my closest friends where it's for her, it's pottery. So she has a pottery wheel at her place on her balcony. And it's not uncommon for her to be in a meditative state for 2 to 4 hours a day on that pottery wheel.
Yeah.
And like, we've got to find those things, and like, that can be a far more effective therapy, if you will, than even talking with a therapist for $400 an hour.
Now, Andy, at the beginning, we talked about the fact that, it's kind of comes with the territory that as an entrepreneur, there's a longer list of things than I will ever be able to tackle. There's more stress. There's more demands on my time. There's just more stuff, right? My calendar's always a mess. My Slack is always going to be exploding. But when we look at the day-to-day tactical stuff, how can we, assuming that all these things are true, what are the day-to-day things that I can do in my work day that are going to benefit my nervous system?
I think one of the things that everyone can do this is, and you can bake it into your calendar. Just find those 1 or 2 hour sections and block it off. And so what I would do when I was really stressed out is, let's say I do my first 2 or 3 hours of work in the office, and then I'd go outside and I'd walk for half an hour. Just like build in those breaks. Don't just sit there and grind and think that that's the solution, because usually what you end up doing is that just becomes the norm.
Right.
And so literally build the breaks into your day. And that break for me was specific around, okay, let me just detach from whatever the hell was going on. If I just go on a walk or be outside or sit in a park, let me just be here right now, conscious and aware. So it's practicing calm awareness. The other is like, it's common for somebody to work in an environment where they have a boss or a leader that triggers them.
Yep.
And maybe that is a very unconscious leader. It probably is. Chances are that leader who, let's say their emotions are hard to predict. One day they're up, the next day they're down. And they just sort of, their seesaw is whipping you all over the place. Or they can be aggressive and overbearing, and their physical and psychological presence is one that is reminiscent of the presence of maybe an overbearing parent, somebody that provokes a strong, immediate emotional response within you because that was conditioned into you earlier in life.
Yeah.
The thing you may need to consider if you're at a big company, leave that team, go to another team, get the fuck away from that influence. Sometimes you got to leave the company.
Mm-hmm. It's worth it. Protecting yourself is worth it.
Yeah. I dealt with this early in my career. In retrospect, I look back at it and I now understand. I understand the psychology of the leaders that I worked under that were not healthy people to be around. At the time, I didn't step away from it, and I should have. Sometimes it's not a failure to say, I don't need to take this bullshit and this isn't good for me. Draw the line and step away if you can, if you need to. Mm-hmm. It may take 6 months. Line up that next gig. That's something you can do right now. If you're a founder and you're dealing with that in a board member, that's hard. That's a different challenge.
Yep.
You may want to seek to replace that board member as quickly as you can, if that's an option. Or you may need to just draw a line in the sand and have a very direct and uncomfortable conversation with that board member. But one thing's for sure is you cannot keep yourself under their thumb, especially if that person is reminiscent of an adult figure from earlier in your life that did not treat you well. Like that can take you from homeostasis to instantly way outside of your tolerable physiological range, like that. And if you do that again and again and again and again, that can contribute to burnout.
Cool. Well, hey, Andy, thank you for walking us through this. What I learned here today is that this is not just about the mind fixing the mind. This is about the body using its own wisdom and using its own resources to make us the most effective version of ourselves that we can. And that we want to not forget about the wisdom that our bodies hold. We want to not forget about the amount of information that they hold and the healing power that our bodies hold. And so for us as entrepreneurs, as we are out there in the stresses of our day, doing the good work, fighting the good fights, we ignore our own bodies at our peril. And if we find ourselves on edge, we find ourselves in burnout situations, then one of the most effective things that we can do is to help the body get back into homeostasis, which is then going to help us be even more effective at doing what we're doing. And I just want to thank you so much for coming in and sharing this stuff and really helping to evolve our view here. Any last comments on nervous system hygiene and things that we should be doing going forward?
Yeah, just realize that you have the mechanisms built into you to feel calm and clear and in a state of peace. Your body has evolved those mechanisms, and you may just need to experiment to find your way back to those things. You don't need to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to search and discover the tools or the techniques or the experts. It's the inherent wisdom of the vitality of the human body, and that's really all we're encouraging. And if you tap into its inherent vitality, your resilience will be remarkable.
Fantastic. Well, Andy Johns, thanks so much for joining us on The Conscious Entrepreneur.